that was it. We went, got brief, what they call brief. They told us where we was going to go to mission and where we drop our bombs at and what kind of weather. When the weatherman told us that it was going to be cloudy over the target, we figured it would be clear. And normally we would be right because I had doubts on the weatherman over the period of years, and especially in those times. If it was cloudy, we appreciated it because then they couldn't see us to shoot at us as well, although they knew exactly where we're at on radar. And all they did was just throw up a barrage of shells, and it was like city blocks of nothing but shrapnel, and shells exploding, and you flew through it. We got on the airplane for takeoff about 3 o'clock. And normally, I flew during the winter, and normally takeoffs were easy, normally zero weather. In other words, you could see about 100 feet, but taking off in zero weather is all right. It's the landing that's the problem. And normally, when we came back, the weather was cleared off. And in England, on takeoff, the fog and so forth and the rain, you couldn't see. And we'd line up with our lights on so we could see each other as we taxied out. And I had my co-pilot sitting beside me, and he sort of watched out for the other airplanes, and I was checking the controls and instruments and so forth, and talking about each of us what we was going to do when we got out when the war was over. And I always told him I was going to be a bus driver, which I never did. And we finally got ready for takeoff, but I'd line the airplane up on the runway. And the heading, we knew exactly the magnetic heading of the runway, and I'd line it up with that, and I'd get in the middle of the runway, and I'd plow the brakes. And I'd give it throttle, we had 4 engines, I'd give it 4 throttle evenly all the way up, doing it slow, so there would be no backfire, coughing, or hesitation on any particular engine. And then when it couldn't hold it no longer with the brakes, I'd turn it loose and release the brakes, and I'd start giving it full throttle. And as soon as it got the tail in flight, the back end up, I'd give it complete throttle, and then my co-pilot was to tell me exactly and go along, follow with me in the controls. And when we come to the yellow line, there's a yellow line down about 3/4 of the end runway, and if you wasn't up in the air by then, you were supposed to cut the throttles, give it full brake, and then if you run out of the runway, you ground loop it. That means you make it spin around on the ground, and that go off into the field somewhere. And we never had to do that, though. Usually I was always off the ground when we hit the yellow line. And then it was up to him to pull the wheels up, with the controls and his hydraulic, and they'd come up, and then we was off. And we usually broke out of the clouds and the bad weather about 3,000 feet, and then we'd have the sunshine. All the American pilots and crew members always had a tan, and that's the reason how you could tell us from England for sure, because we always had tans, and that was from flying above the clouds into the sunshine. And a lot of times, most times, you were looking in the sun for some reason or other. It always worked out that way. And then we'd go over the target and drop the bombs, come home. First 2 or 3 missions seemed to be all right. There was no problems at all. And then we had a rough mission. One came up, it was in deep heart of Germany, and they'd warned us that it's going to be bad and all this. And so we get up about, take off and all that, and we get up about 4,000 feet. The crew was complaining about oxygen. There was no oxygen to them. Now, I was on a separate pilot and co permission to abort the mission, and I came back and landed. And then crew went on. I stayed with the aircraft and went over the airplane with the ground crew and asked him